English literature. People don't love it, I didn't love it, and yet I still got 100% in my English literature GCSE. And right now, I'm going to be breaking down all of the study strategies that I use that help me do that so that you can do the same in your exams this summer. The first thing that you want is to understand what you're actually rewarded for in an exam. Because with a subject like English, the mark scheme isn't as clear and definite as it is for a subject such as maths or physics, where you can clearly see whether you're right or wrong. So the way you're going to go about doing this is understand the AOs, so the assessment objectives. Now, for English, assessment objective 1 is having a clear argument and relevance to the text. Assessment objective 2 is related to your analysis of language, structure, form. AO3 is your contextual relevance. So, for example, if you're doing a Shakespearean play, it's relating the ideas of the play back to the Jacobean period. And AO4 is then for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Knowing what these assessment objectives are allows you to then implement them into your work. You know that you need to be hitting not only analysis of language, of structure, but you need to be hitting context. You need to be constantly making reference back to the text. You need to have a clear and structured line of argument. Your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar needs to be on point. Otherwise, you're going to be missing out certain assessment objectives. So, for example, no matter how good your analysis of language and structure is, if you don't include context, you can never get into the top band because you're not hitting all of the objectives. Now that you know what they are, you're going to make sure that whenever you try a practice essay, you go and have a look at the examiner's report that relates to that practice essay, because in that essay, it will talk about which assessment objectives students did well on, but which ones they might have missed, because sometimes the question is phrased in such a way that it becomes harder for you to actually hit a certain assessment objective. Reading those examiner's reports will make it really clear what the examiners are rewarding and what they don't like. The next thing sounds super obvious, and it's mastering your set texts effectively. But this doesn't mean just having a few quotations. Just knowing quotations is not going to get you into those top bands that you're looking for, because not only do you need to know the quotations themselves, you actually need to understand how they relate to the rest of the text. Where exactly do they sit? What is the relevance of them taking place in that particular portion of the text? Why are they in a certain act if it's a play? Why are they in a certain chapter if it's a book? And you're not going to get that if you're not thinking about the entire set text holistically rather than thinking of it as a number of different quotes. That being said, you should be looking at memorising about 3 quotes per character and per theme, but obviously try and pick the quotes that you can use the most. So if there is one particular quote that you can use for a character and 3 different themes, that's definitely one you're going to want to choose. If it's something that's not very relevant, that's not, a pivotal point in the play or the book, and it's only relevant to one theme or one character, it's probably not something you want to bother memorising. But alongside memorising quotations, you must be memorising analysis. Too many people will just memorise quotes, but they won't actually know all of the language and structural devices that they can pick out of that quote. If you're going to go to the effort of memorising, you might as well memorise your analysis as well. And for each theme that you identify, you also want to be looking at the relevance of that to the time period. So what time period things can you bring in that tie into the theme? So going back to, for example, Macbeth, if you're talking about the witches and you've got the theme of the supernatural, you can link that to the way that that was viewed in Jacobean times, that people genuinely had a belief in the supernatural, and it brings to life your analysis in a much clearer way, and it means you're hitting that assessment objective number 3. Genuinely, the best piece of advice that I can give you is a flexible essay structure. You need a structure that means that for every paragraph that you're sitting down and writing in your exam, you know exactly how you're going to structure it. You know exactly what is going to be flowing off your pen. Okay, you don't know exactly what the question is going to be, and I'm not saying you're memorising sentences, but you know exactly how you're going to structure things. So you might be using the point, evidence, explain, link. I think that's very, very good, but that doesn't help you hit all of those assessment objectives. So instead, this was a structure that I used. I think it's a lot better. So I would make my point, and that would be directly relevant to the question that I am answering. I would come up with some evidence. I would bring forward my quotation. I would then pinpoint the language or structural feature that I wanted to analyse in more depth. I would go on to analyse it. I would zoom in on a particular word, a particular way of phrasing, a particular structural device, rhetorical device, whatever it is, and I would do another set of analysing. And then I would go and link it to context. And then after that, I'd link it straight back to the conclusion, to the question itself. Or after introducing context, I would then go back to the quotation, and I would try and do this as much as I possibly could, just sometimes under the pressure of an exam. I wouldn't be able to think of something, but genuinely I think this is what helped me get right to getting full marks in all my essays, is after introducing some level of contexts, some idea about how it relates to the time period in which it was written, I would then think, oh, is there a difference between how a reader would interpret this quotation in that time period versus a modern reader? Am I sitting here, in 2025 reading it, thinking about it differently? Why? And I would go back, does that context mean that the interpretation of that quotation is very different? If so, I'd discuss that. I'd talk about authorial intent. And having that little extra bit beyond the Peel structure, I think really makes you stand out, because so many examiners are going to see Peel essays, and they're great. And if you stick to that, you'll do solidly well. You'll get a good middle band grade. But if you really want to be pushing into those top bands, pushing to top grades, a structure like this, where you're explicitly analysing multiple things from the quotation, linking to context, and actually analysing the context itself, is really going to make you stand out and get you those grades that you want. In terms of revision, you're not going to want to hear this, but you should be practicing timed essays at least weekly. I would do 2 or 3 a week. Every time I had an English lit study session, I would be doing a timed essay. I did not enjoy forcing myself to do timed essays. But the only way that you're going to learn to do well in your essay in the exam is if you actually practice by doing essays. So at some point, you're going to have to sit down and force yourself to do it. Now, when I was doing them, I would be writing under timed conditions, the same that I would have in the exam. When it was available, I would try and get my teacher to mark through it. Obviously, that's not always available, so I would then go to the examiner's report and I would try and mark it myself. I would try and very critically go through it, pretending it's someone, like the piece of work of someone that I don't like and I want to find all the errors. Sometimes just doing that can really make you think, oh, I could have really improved this, I could have linked to this, it would sound so much better if I'd added in this extra point. Because if you're going through it with an eye of like, I want to make this better, like I want my corrections to be smarter than the actual work, it becomes quite an interesting challenge in how much extra you can squeeze out of the question. And sometimes I found that the editing and the marking of my own essays was almost more valuable to me than actually writing them in the first place. Now, in terms of revision to get context, quotes, concepts into your head, what I would do is flashcards for the quotes with the quote on the front and some analysis in the back. And I would also be doing a lot of blurting. So I would write down a theme in the middle of a page and I would try and think of all of the quotes, all of the ideas that were related to that theme. How could I analyse it? How is it presented in the play? I would do the same for characters. And oh my goodness, thank you for watching this far, because this tip is going to make the world of difference. Prepare for your unseen poetry. Genuinely prepare for it. The amount of students who do nothing for unseen poetry, because it is very, very hard to prepare for, but they let themselves down. They'll know the set texts amazingly. They'll be getting close to full marks on all of those essays for their set texts and for their poetry anthology. But then they're going to let themselves down on unseen poetry because they just have not practiced it. You're not going to do that. You are going to practice for unseen poetry. How are you going to do that? Well, there are so many poems out there that you can find. One of my favourite things to do was to use the Poetry Society website. They have so many poems on there, so many different themes. I would just pull up 2 of them on a similar theme. You can filter by theme, and then I just literally pick the first 2. And I would pretend that that was my unseen poetry paper, and I would write it. And yes, this isn't something that you can go away and look at a mark scheme for, but the more you do it, the more you're going to find that you become more perceptive, that you're more able to pick out these nuanced ideas, and examiners do mark unseen poetry quite lightly. You can get away with a lot. So I think this is a really wonderful strategy for doing it, and genuinely, when I say you are putting yourself ahead of 99.9% of students, you really are. Those are all my tips for getting full marks in your GCSE English Literature paper this year. I really hope it helped. Let me know if you have any further questions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.